Welcome to episode 34 of the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast. I'm Ace, here with Alicia, and here to introduce an episode with Dr. Heliana Ramirez and Causha Spellman-Timmons. I wasn't here for this one, so you're going to have to tell us about it.
Yeah, and we recorded this back in August, so a little while ago. I'm glad we're getting this up now. And Heliana, she is an amazing human, but she's a clinical social worker, a researcher, and an organizer who focuses a lot on racial and anti-LGBTQ workplace trauma. But generally, if you've had any experience or any interest in like toxic workplaces or workplace wellness, you'll really like this conversation. And we also get into culturally responsive suicide prevention. What else do we get into? Harm reduction. Chicana feminist queer theory is something Heliana is very passionate about. So it's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And peace.
Yeah, and I just want to add, although I wasn't there, Dr. Heliana and Causha, they're social work powerhouses. And I've had them both on the Critical Social Worker podcast, so if you like this one, make sure you look us up over there. All right, everyone, hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. Peace.
Hey, listen, we got some things that we gotta discuss, how we can affect the system and make it better for us. But first, we gotta start with the man in the mirror. Open your third eye and the vision's gonna be much clearer. We are revolutionary. We are visionary. And we stand resolute on those who pollute the minds of many. Revolutionary. We are visionary. And we stand resolute on those who pollute the minds of many. This is the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, y'all.
Welcome to another episode of the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Alicia, and you will see I don't have my usual co-host, Ace, with me, but I am blessed to have Causha Spellman-Timmons with me. How are you doing, Causha?
I am doing quite well today. How are you? Thanks for
I'm
having
pretty
me
good,
on.
of course. We couldn't think of a better co-host, so we're super excited. You were available and willing and excited.
Big shoes
Yeah.
to fill. I'm ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so Ace, he's doing great, but if you know him, he's doing a million projects at one time, and he's doing the critical social worker with UAF, and so just a little burnt out, needs a break. But we'll have the pleasure of speaking to our wonderful guest today in September. So we are joined today by Heliana Ramirez, and Heliana is a clinical social worker and researcher, and we're going to get into all kinds of topics today. But good morning or good afternoon. Is it good afternoon for you?
It is. Good afternoon.
Yeah.
It's so nice to be here with you both. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And I had the pleasure of first being in the space with Heliana it was a gathering for Mr. Mark Tuggle's new documentary. And so that was super awesome. And I remember very vividly the moment that we were all introducing ourselves and you came on the screen and your energy is just so calming and I can't even think of words. It's just beautiful. And so when you reached out after just when we connected on LinkedIn, I was very excited. So thank you for that as well and joining us today. But yeah, do you want to give just a brief intro of anything just coming to mind today, where you're at today, who you are, for anybody that may be listening that doesn't know?
Thank you so much for that and your really gracious, kind words. I also remember the moment in the meeting when I heard you and Ace speak, and I just thought, wait, what? Revolutionary social work? Who are these people? How can I get around them? And then connecting with you. And then I don't remember at what point realizing that we all know Causha. And I was like, oh, okay, sorry, it's over now. Causha is one of my absolute favorite people on the planet at this moment. I knew that, like, okay, this is a connection. So for anyone who is logging in, who is living with blindness, I'll just describe myself. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a light-complected Chicana of mixed race ancestry, Mexican, Irish, Czech mostly. And I have long brown hair, streaks of silver gray, glasses, red lipstick, and a black top. I'm sitting in front of a cream-colored background that is blank, but there are some roses and small plants and sculpture behind me of two hands that are offering a heart. And I am logging on from unceded territory of the Wintu, and I am the descendant of Grandma Helen and Lupe Ramirez and Fidelis McMullen and Charles McMullen. And I think my dads might be logging in. My dads Dad and Kevin, if you're there, so glad that you're here. So thank you for the invitation.
Oh, awesome. I hope they can log in. And if you're out there in the audience, do let us know. Hello, Chanel. Hello, hello. Yes, thank you so much for grounding us there and giving all of our audiences a brief description. And Causha, how do you two know each other? I would love to know that history because, yeah, I was the same way when I realized, oh my goodness, we're all connected. So excited.
Yeah, Eliana and I met when Chanel and I did actually the last in-person conference that we co-facilitated together, January 2020 in Long Beach, actually. And it was, yeah, and met Eliana there. Eliana kind of took care of Chanel and I, and it was just yeah, we bonded from there and never we've known each other since. We kind of just stay connected here and there, and I'm really grateful to call Eliana a friend. And even that we met through my best friend who I've known since high school. So just really deep connections. So yeah, I'm always
Yeah.
grateful to know you and to just witness the work that you do. So I'm excited for today's conversation.
Yeah. And it's amazing how small our worlds become when we're doing this kind of work. And you find connections, right? And you're thinking, how do we all know each other? And we're all across the globe now, the people that we're connecting with. And there's so many intersections of relationships and knowledge and experiences. And I think that's one of the beauties of this work that we do, whether we want to call it social work or just work for humanity, liberation, abolition, all of that stuff. It connects us in such a beautiful way. Hey, Charlie. Good to have you here as well.
Hi, Charlie.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in. So, Eliana, there was a lot of stuff that when we connected and we were talking, and there's so many topics we can get into, but I would love to start with the work you're doing on workplace trauma, healing, and recovery, because I think it's really hitting for a lot of people right now with everything going on in the world, but just within the workplace. It comes up in the workplace. The societal challenges come up there along with our own burnout in social work, but also in other fields. So I would love to know how you got into what you're doing right now and anything you can share on why this is one of your passions.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so my dissertation was looking at trauma and recovery among LGBT military service members and veterans. And so I was looking at the ways that LGBT service members under Don't Ask, Don't Tell and other anti-LGBT military policy increase the risk of danger, frankly, from other service members. So we're talking about people who are going to work, because that's what it is. If you're in the military, they're going to work, and they are not only having to defend against the so-called enemy, but the people who are behind the green line. So other service members who are part of the same military that they are serving with. And we just saw extremely high rates of military sexual trauma, of hate crimes, LGBT service members being targeted by their own command, by peers, and by people who were ranked lower than them in the military. I am a pacifist, and I also know that a lot of LGBT people enter the US military, and I am committed to serving LGBT people wherever we show up in the world. And I worked at Veterans Affairs for many years, about 13. And in that work was really drawn to attending to our LGBT service members and veterans because we have higher rates of all sorts of different kinds of institutional and interpersonal betrayals and traumas. And I was really honored to work with LGBT vets who are some of the most courageous people. We see that Harvey Milk, who came back from the US military, we see even our pride flags, our rainbow pride flag, our trans pride flag that are flown all over the world were designed by LGBT veterans of the US military. There's a lot that we don't know about the ways that LGBT veterans come back from their military service and make huge changes that benefit all of society and especially LGBT people, civilians and veterans. So that's kind of like what started my interest in this topic, but then it keeps coming up over and over again. So the Pulse nightclub, I'm going to trigger warning for folks or activation warning for folks. I'm going to mention a recent moment of trauma in our LGBTQ community, the Pulse nightclub massacre that happened in Orlando, Florida. There was a veteran who was a bouncer, and he is credited for having saved the lives of 90 people that night. What happened was the shooting started and people ran into a back room and were panicking, of course. And he, knowing the building, walked into the room and he's yelling, "There is an exit over there. Open the door, open the door." It was an exit to the parking lot or somewhere. But people were in such a panic that they couldn't even make sense of what he was saying. So he somehow got himself across the room, opened the door. All those people got out, and right behind them, the gunman arrived. And so part of the reason why I bring this up is because for LGBT people, whether we are in the military or we are civilians, we are at higher risk of abuse and violence in the workplace. And that's just one example of it. But it also, I think, is an important story because our communities have unique sources of resistance and awareness that can keep all of us safer in a society where the pressure is really coming in on us right now, right? From all directions. And so I really look to our LGBTQ folks. I look to Indigenous communities. I look to Black communities, Latinx communities who are focusing on liberation because we oftentimes have answers to what's happening around us. But I think having those answers and having those perspectives puts us at increased risk of further isolation and institutional betrayal. When I was mobbed out of a job for refusing to break laws and for speaking up on behalf of people who were being disproportionately injured in the workplace, it was a real wake-up call. My privileges, my light complexion, my femness, my education had really protected me for many years. I was able to speak about systemic racism, speak about systemic homophobia, and was virtually left alone from the institution. And then there was a moment when it backfired. And so I know that Black women, for example, are oftentimes leading the charge against systemic oppression and are the first to be wiped out from that. So it's my privilege I was able to get to this point in my career without having had that experience. But when I went through it myself, it was a real wake-up call. And initially, I was completely and totally devastated. I had never experienced anything like this before. I had always had the highest remarks on my annual employment reviews. My clients loved me. The community that I served were really appreciative of the work that I was doing. And so it didn't make sense what had just happened to me. And it took me some time to understand the dynamics of workplace mobbing. When workplace bullying and abuse, they weaponize the institutional power of human resources to force a person out. And that expulsion from a community is especially dangerous to us because of the ways that our brains are constructed. So that the same part of the brain that registers social isolation and exile is the same part of the brain that registers physical pain. It was an evolutionary adaptive thing for us to be able to survive back in the day when we were cave people, right? To be able to survive the saber-toothed tiger or whatever it was, we needed to stay in our pack. So that got me into a whole new area of thinking around the neuroscience of trauma and the neuroscience specifically of racial trauma and LGBTQ related trauma. And I'll pause there because I can get so nerdy and excited about this stuff that I'll just go on forever.
I'm nerding out just listening. You can just keep going.
Well, the one thing that I'll
Oh my
tag
God.
on to this then is just also to say that one of the big pieces for me in my initial healing, moving from that place of trauma to post-traumatic growth, professional post-traumatic growth, was realizing that I had just joined a group of amazing people. The folks who tend to be targeted by workplace abuse tend to have subject matter expertise, tend to be highly ethical people with integrity who name abuse when they see it, and tend to be kind of like generally getting along well with others. And it is when we are paired with imposter leaders, people who have been promoted without subject matter expertise, who feel an existential threat being around somebody who's kind of like a natural high achiever. It's that dynamic that can be so dangerous. And the other thing that I've realized is that those of us who do DEI work, or however you want to refer to it, because we've been doing it for a really long time now. um, we are uniquely positioned for that institutional betrayal and backlash. And I think social workers are as well, because the NASW Code of Ethics compels us to name injustice, to name systemic racism. And that's part of why I became a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that our profession does not prepare us for the institutional betrayal and backlash that will always come at us, especially if we are people of color, if we are BIPOC, if we are LGBTQ, if we are neurodiverse, living with disabilities, or any number of other underrepresented social categories in predominantly white institutions.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
100%. And Janelle just said imposter leaders are extremely dangerous and intentionally so.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, 100. When you said that about the people that are promoted and them being the ones without the expertise and it's the threat of other people, that hits so hard. And I wonder what for those like middle management positions. And Eliana, I think we've talked about this a little bit before. And you're in that position and you have the senior leaders up there and you have the people that you're trying to serve and protect who are serving and protecting their people down there. It's such a hard place to be because you don't have the full power to implement certain things and you're also at the mercy of I could lose my job if I speak up too loudly. And do you have any advice for that kind of layer of us in middle management and how we support our staff but also ourselves really? That there's that fear there.
Yeah, it's a real uniquely difficult position to be in. I think especially as social workers. I had that experience at Veterans Affairs. I was a supervisor of peer specialists, and ultimately I decided that I did not want to do middle management with the Veterans Affairs because I could see that the ways I would always ultimately end up being in a position where I was trying to be a shock absorber, frankly,
Mm.
of the institutional betrayal that happens from higher levels and would never actually be able to protect the folks with whom I worked. And I would advocate up, but there would always be a cost associated with it. So for me in that particular system, and it was one of the best employers I've ever had, by the way. Like I was there for 13 years for a reason. I think that part of it is having a really honest assessment of the organization.
Mm.
And no organization is perfect. There's always going to be risk involved in advocating for change. But I think the kind of taking the rose colored glasses off and also being able to see through whatever interpersonal and institutional trauma we might carry, us and our ancestors as well, because that gets passed down to us culturally and all sorts of stuff. But being able to see, are the people who are in the ultimate positions of power people who create an environment with psychological safety, which means this is an environment where we're allowed to make mistakes. This is an environment where we are encouraged to share half-baked ideas, and we are not, and this is an environment where executives admit mistakes in public. Those three things research has told us are absolutely essential for so-called psychological safety. And I say so-called because for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, for LGBTQ folks, for folks living with neurodiversity, there is no actual safe environment, right? We always have to keep our guards up a little bit. But I think ultimately, if we see executives, and it's important to also look at boards of directors, right? It's not just whoever's the CEO of a company or a medical director, but are those others that are in the executive leadership positions coming from a political and ideological mooring that is based in justice? And if they're not, if they are driven by dollar signs, if they're driven by politically maneuvering themselves in the larger environment and community, and that's going to drive their behaviors, then it will never be a safe place to advocate.
Asking ourselves those questions. Causha, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, well, first I'm going to read Charlie's statement because I think this is important, and Eliana, you might want to speak to this. And then I do have a follow-up question. But Charlie said, the lack of subject matter expertise from a supervisor was an experience I had in a recent internship. It led to exclusion from and restriction within rooms I had every right to be in, limiting my exposure to the work and learning opportunities. The whole point of being an intern.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Charlie, that happened to you. And it is one of the most painful and messed up compliments to you, Charlie. They didn't want you in there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people and there are organizations who can honor and deserve being around you. And that those people weren't. I'm sorry that they did that to you. Ultimately, it undermines their efficacy as an organization, and it defies the commitment that they've made to the public by accepting any kind of grants, right? Or any resources to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry that you were the scapegoat in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you, Eliana. I take it as a compliment when they don't want you in the room. So, yeah, I'm really sorry that happened. And it is unfortunate, particularly when it happens in learning. Well, all environments should be learning environments, which is part of the problem. But particularly when you're still a student, you're doing internships, externships, etc., practicum experiences, and, folks are intentionally cutting off learning opportunities because they don't want to be wrong, essentially, which is a conversation I was actually just having recently. And a little bit of what I was going to ask you, Eliana, like, how do you feel, the social work profession is showing up in workplace trauma right now? And what are some, I know this is a big question, so we can talk about it throughout if you like. But and what are some things that you really think need to shift? I know we've had these conversations before, but I love hearing your thoughts on this.
I'm immediately thinking about Palestinian social workers
Mm,
and the NASW silence about the genocide in Palestine. You cannot tell me, you cannot make it make sense for me
mm-hmm,
who we are as we are supposed to be leaders in addressing and naming abuse. There is nothing more abusive than genocide.
absolutely.
There just isn't. So for our Palestinian social workers and our Palestinian clients who are going in to either provide mental health services or organizational advocacy, or, whether we're micro, macro, or meso social workers, we are to be healing.
Mm,
And the pressures to show up in environments that are supposedly healing environments and disavow ourselves of the reality of the violence that's happening right now. And it's not just in Palestine. Of course,
right.
there are many places around the world that people are being starved and people are being murdered by governments. So,
Mm-hmm,
but I think in particular right now, the silence around from NASW on this topic is extreme. I think that the people who are in managerial positions right now with social work, whether it's interns or clinicians, we cannot expect that our workforce comes to work from 9 to 5 or whatever the hours are, and that we compartmentalize these realities.
mm-hmm,
They are happening. And you mentioned Kelechi Boso earlier, Cache, the person that we also, a friend we have in
mm-hmm,
common. So Kelechi and I created this thing called Discussions That Matter in 2020. And it was bringing together mental health providers, licensed social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists,
mm-hmm,
nurse practitioners, as well as peer specialists. And importantly, we brought ourselves together and had discussions about everything from Black Lives Matter movement to COVID-19 pandemic to wildfires, right? The ecological
mm,
devastation that was happening around so many of us. And what we realized was that, our clinicians were this buffer. We were frontline staff that were not being talked about like that in the beginning of the pandemic and with everything else that was going on. And our
right.
clinicians of color are working in agencies where clients of color are coming in with increased racial trauma.
Mm-hmm,
And those organizations were like, hey, you've got some melanin. Why don't you fix racism here in this organization? And meanwhile, the clients are like, do not send me to that white clinician. Don't send me to somebody that I have to explain what this racial trauma is, right? So our clinicians were just being squeezed in a way and experiencing our own racial trauma at the same time. So I think that as a master's student, last thing I'll say on this is that as a master's student, I created a course with Holiday Simmons and Adrienne. I think her last name at the time was Brown, but we created a class for ourselves that was around Black and Chicana feminist social work practice. And what would
mm,
our practice be if it was informed by those feminisms, by womanisms and Chicana feminisms? And part of what those wisdoms teach us is that it is a false assumption that we can disconnect, and we shouldn't be disconnecting these parts of our lives. Instead, we need to have the therapeutic and professional acuity to be able to know when we use our lived experience in a way that actually helps our work and doesn't undermine or take away from our clients' experiences. So I think that's the other piece that NASW really could do well by hiring and bringing in more folks of color and more feminists and queer theorists and so on, indigenous folks as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
And just not being silent. I think that's a
Yeah.
huge thing, right? Of just speaking up. We had Alan Detlef on the podcast last week, and he's very loud about speaking up about Palestine, and he was able to share so many resources that we as social workers can go to. I see if I can actually pop one up right now. There's a strike for Gaza every Thursday happening, encouraging people not to spend any money to really stand up against the economy, which is going to be, it's a huge hit. The economy is one of the powerhouses of the empire. And so just getting into spaces like that, we don't always have to rely on the NASW to tell us what to think and what to do, right? We have to look for it ourselves often. And Alan Detlef is a really good resource if anyone's interested. I'll see if I can post anything while we're talking.
Yeah, and Chanel said, and then I'm going to read Chanel's, and then I have a question that is a follow-up and is in alignment with this. Chanel says, I feel that folks in middle management have to draw a line in the sand and be very clear and upfront about it, moving with integrity and with your core values at the center and being vocal about what you stand for is imperative. She said, I love telling upper management what I'm not going to do. It might get you fired from subpar environments, but I don't want to work anywhere that doesn't cultivate integrity anyway. And I agree with that. So my question is, and maybe both of you could speak to this, I'm not sure, because I'm a person, we heard someone recently say, when I say we, I mean Chanel and I, we were watching something and we heard someone say that you can't operate in fear and faith at the same time. And what occurred to me then was that I don't know how, I've never operated in fear, right? Like I used to get in trouble in school as a kid. We were just talking about this recently for correcting my teachers and like letting them know when they were giving the class wrong information, like, because it didn't make sense to me that I wouldn't somehow just because I was the student. My mind never did hierarchy in the way that most humans' mind, it just never did. So it didn't occur to me that I would be being incorrect or could be perceived as disrespectful for providing accurate information simply because of my title of student, right? And so I realize now as, a 41-year-old that I have not really operated in fear my whole life. I just say whatever I say. And if it gets me in trouble, it gets me in trouble, but I don't know how else to be. Okay, so my question is then, for those who function in a bit more fear, which I think is many folks, and for many different reasons, right? People have different responsibilities. They have different, rhyme and reasons as to why fear may show up in the way that it does. How do you overcome that? Or how do you sit with that in a way that allows you to push through that fear so that you can get to another side? I know, I do a lot of leadership coaching and it's a lot of like inner work, but sometimes you don't have the time to do all of that. So just for the everyday person who's like, I'm trying to show up for, the people I'm working with, and I'm also trying to make sure that, I have a job tomorrow.
Yes.
And they're struggling. They're really struggling with being loud and standing on something.
You would pose that question to both of us. Alicia, do you want to respond to it?
Sure. My first thought is, Causha, I was the opposite as a kid. I've always had that fear, not really a fear of authority, but hierarchy was very much, it led to a lot of anxiety, I think, for me. And I always wanted to appease authority and people hierarchically higher than me. And I've had to do a lot of work myself in just questioning why that is and challenging it and allowing my voice to be louder when it needs to be. I wish I'd had a little bit more of that and stood up and said, wait, that's not right. But I didn't. And so I think I'm still doing that work now. But I found that it's really, when you said that you can't operate within fear and faith at the same time, my first thought was, I think I do though. And then I thought, no, I think I have to recognize my fear, and then I have to shift to have faith and sit in a new energy, whether it's like gratitude or hope. I have to shift my energy intentionally in order to get out of that fear state. And I think me and Ace have talked a lot about manifestation lately on the podcast. And I know it sounds so woo-woo to some people, but that has really helped me with getting out of that fear state, because I've seen so many things come to fruition from genuine active manifestation that I can then say, okay, I'm fearful in this position, but I'm manifesting this different thing. And I can take a step back and be patient and wait for the universe to allow things to fall into place and still have the hope. So I am fearful, but I think I've made that shift. And so that's still inner work though, that we don't always have time to do. But that's what came to mind for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll be honest. I mean, these weren't my words, so I also thought the same thing. I thought, but I feel like for most of my life, I kind of did. It was just, I didn't allow the fear. I think it came and went for me a little quicker than other, so, but when you think about how that transitions into adulthood and decisions that you make as far as in the workplace, for instance, whether, and I even think about, and I know this goes in both professional settings and personal settings, where some folks have an easier time advocating for someone else, for instance, than advocating for themselves. Like, oh, I can take it, you know, they really need this. Yeah, so it's just interesting the ways in which it shows up.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
I would say for myself that I live with fear all the time. I experience it. And I think especially right now, like I'm pretty scared. I'm just going to be blunt. I am very frightened about ecological collapse. I'm delighted for the collapse of empire, and it's terrifying the way that it's all collapsing right now. Ice raids, you cannot get me to not feel terror right now. I think that's an appropriate response. I think it's very, especially my grandfather was deported multiple times. He was a farm worker. So for some of this terror that I'm feeling right now, it's ancestral as well as like my own, just like kind of having an awareness of what's happening in the community. But I think about the invisible institution and about people who were enslaved, who gathered at night to pray together and bringing my understanding, and I welcome any corrections to what I understand about how this happened, but that there would be like big bowls and people would pray and sing into the bowls because the acoustics would take the prayers and the song up into the heavens, so it would be less audible to people who engaged in slavery. And so then there would be somebody down the road who would be a lookout, and they would give a warning if the so-called slave masters were coming. And that way everyone could disperse before they would show up, because there were very, very serious and lethal repercussions that would happen if people were found to be praying. And so I think about that, and I think about like how, like when we regulate our nervous systems and when we co-regulate together, there's a way to sit with the fear and also have faith simultaneously. And so for me, there's a little bit of like nervous system regulation. There's also a little bit of like turning it over to a higher power. So what you said, Alicia, really resonated with me. I know that faith for me, not in an institution, because it's a very dangerous institution of the Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic. And a sense of connection to the universe and to the planet and to other humans, that allows me to sit with both at the same time, I think.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
like how you explain that, because I think that's also how it feels, that it is simultaneous, but I'm not sure if there's a full switch that happens between that. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I appreciate that perspective as well, Eliana, because while you were speaking, it made me realize that, like, oh, there's still some of that, which has been a benefit at times, but also, I guess, a detriment sometimes. And I know many of us experience this, but like, there's always someone who has it worse. And so you never allow yourself to. And I think for me, that's how I've lived my whole life. thinking about my ancestors and feeling like, how dare I complain about anything, has pretty much been how so it took a while to start feeling like I could even allow myself to feel anything about like the stuff I was going through. And not only concerning myself with ancestors, I think we can take anything too far sometimes. So yeah, I do appreciate that perspective, and probably folks who are listening as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
That's a really good point too, Causha. Sorry, I just want to speak on the when you are saying, "Well, my ancestors had it so much worse," and so you don't give yourself enough space. And there's so many people. One person, incredible woman I work with, the same thing, and her thing that comes to mind is, I have to suffer in order to be a good person because my grandmother
Mm,
suffered, and her grandmother suffered, and her grandmother suffered. And we've worked so hard on that thought process and that somatic feeling in her whole being that comes
mhm,
up. And she's now at a point where she does not believe she has to suffer to be a good person, to serve others. But it takes
mm,
so much time and work. And first, you have to know you're doing it. Because I think a lot of
mhm,
people, a lot of us don't know we're doing it at first. And so you have to realize that. But you can get through that and you can still honor your ancestral history and suffering and still walk forward in the world thinking, I've had a really crappy day. I'm going to allow myself just a little bit of, huh, hmm, a little love and tender and care. So
mhm.
yeah, that was,
Yeah,
you just brought to mind that person.
yeah.
That's such a powerful example. I appreciate that so much. And I feel like that's part of what white supremacy has taken from us, that the
Mm,
majority of our ancestral lineage was not suffering. If we
Mm,
go back prior
that's
to
true. That's so
colonization, if
true.
we go back
mhm.
prior to chattel slavery, right? We come from people who were attuned with themselves and one another and this planet.
Right. Yep. I
That's
think that's
spot
so
on.
important. And it also, when you were saying that example, Alicia, I was thinking like, oh my gosh, that's what the profession of social work tells us.
Mm,
That like you have to be
yes.
suffering in order to be a good social worker. If you're making money, oh,
Hmm.
you must be one of those. What kind of social worker are you that you're making money? Yeah, and that Jessica said, I appreciate that reminder. I appreciate that reminder as well. And so, where is a space in which, Eliana, to bring it back to the workplace trauma, that you've seen any shifts, or have you seen any shifts?
In the workplace specifically?
Yeah, in regards to workplace trauma, like in a positive direction. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah,
Didn't
that's a
mean to
great
stump
question. I
you.
mean, I think that we're in a kind of a Me Too movement with workplace abuse. I'm seeing more and more people
Mm.
on LinkedIn, on Glassdoor, on YouTube sharing their stories of workplace trauma and appropriately identifying the problem as external and systemic rather than beating ourselves up over the smear campaigns that are so common to workplace abuse dynamics. I think that there's also this simultaneous conversation around psychological safety and psychosocial hazards in the workplace. So
Mm.
shout out to Dr. I. David Daniels, who recently published a book called Psychosocial Hazards Are Real. And his work, I think, is absolutely at the forefront of where we need to be thinking about these issues, because when we talk about OSHA, when we talk about these federal, well, what we have historically, I don't know that we even have OSHA. Do we have OSHA anymore? I don't know. But
Mhm.
like, the idea was that we go to work to exchange our labor for pay. It's not
Mm.
labor for abuse.
Yes.
And historically, we have thought that the injuries, the mental injuries, not mental illness, mental injuries that come from psychological abuse in the workplace were invisible. And therefore, if you were to take an abusive employer to court, the jury would not find in your favor because they're invisible. PTSD, it's invisible. Well, now we
Oh.
know actually through MRIs and fMRIs, magnetic resonance
Mm,
imaging scans, and so on, you can actually see on brain scans, you can see changes to
Mhm.
brain structure, which we know
yes.
are associated with brain function just from exposure to psychological abuse in the workplace.
Mm.
So I think that there's some really exciting developments that are happening on the neuroscience side, where we understand now that these are not invisible injuries. And then the third part of it, there's some really great work from Dr. Carter, who has written about race-based traumatic stress. And he has written a couple books recently that are really helping clinicians as well as employment attorneys to measure and document the psychological injury or mental injury from workplace abuse.
Thank you for that.
Can you say his name again?
Dr. Carter, and I can
Carter.
find the link in just a moment.
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful. Because that is a lot of, I think, when we know about these things and we want to help ourselves or other people, and we're like, where can we go? How can we find out more information and support? Because you're right, it is more like this Me Too thing coming out where people are feeling, well, someone's having the same experience as me. And that is powerful in itself. But then it goes to them, what do I do about it? You know? What do I do? And I wonder, Aliana, in terms of people are listening and thinking, I'm in that position and I'm being abused, but I'm the breadwinner for the family,
Yeah.
or I'm trying to get my hours, really practical things. They're paying off my loans, these almost financial abuse in itself, like we're financially tied to these institutions sometimes.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
100%. I would say, first of all, the reality of what you're juggling of making ends meet. And I just put the 2 references in the chat there, Dr. Carter's books.
Thank you.
Measuring the Effects of Racism, Guidelines for the Assessment and Treatment of Race-Based Traumatic Stress Injury. And the second is Confronting Racism, Integrating Mental Health Research into Legal Strategies and Reforms. I would say that we have research now that shows us that the same power and control tactics that are used by workplace abusers map on exactly to the power and control tactics that are used by domestic violence abusers and interpersonal violence. And it does involve financial abuse, and it does involve isolating and destroying the credibility of a person, right? And keeping them from others and so on. So the injuries that come from workplace abuse are so deep, and the pressure to keep the lights on and keep food on the table is real. We're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. Absolutely. What I've realized from my own workplace abuse experience is that the term is stress-induced analgesia. When we are in dangerous environments, the brain keeps us from conscious awareness of the full extent of our injury. Let's go back to that saber-toothed tiger. Saber-toothed tiger is coming and is like slashing at you. The brain, we don't want the brain to spend time thinking like, gosh, I wonder how much blood I've just lost. And should I fight in this way or that way, right? No. Instead, the brain is like, fight or flight. Let's get out of here. Let's save ourselves. And so what that means in a workplace context is that many of us who are being abused in work are like, oh yeah, I'm aware that there's some kind of abuse that's happening here, but we don't have a full awareness of how much our bodies and our minds have been damaged until we get out of that workplace. I work with so many workplace abuse survivors who will say, I was fired or I fled constructive discharge to save my sanity, my health, my professional reputation, whatever. And then all of a sudden, I'm like having all these symptoms of physiological problems. It's not that those weren't there before, is that the brain was protecting the person from full awareness of it. So the first thing that I really encourage people to do is get a little bit of space away from the danger. Use family medical leave if you can. If you don't have access to FMLA because you haven't been working there long enough, use your sick leave, use any vacation time because the prefrontal cortex, and if it's okay for me to bring out my little handy dandy brain.
Oh, please.
Love it.
So the CEO, the thinking part of the brain, it goes offline when the amygdala, which is the brain's alarm system, is having to be keeping us safe. And so literally we need to get away from that chronic stress hormone flooding for the brain to even be able to identify all of our options. So the first thing that I would say is it's unfortunate when workplace abuse advocates say things like, just leave, because for many of us, that's not possible.
Right.
And our brains may not be able to identify all of our possible options when we're in that abusive environment. So is there a middle ground that we can get a little bit of space from?
That is so important. And it I know some people might be tired of hearing me say this, but I relate everything to being in a relationship, and that's what it's an abusive relationship with your workplace. And I personally feel like, I don't know, it's hard because then you wouldn't, well, most folks wouldn't convince someone to find a way to maintain their abusive relationship with a human. But yet when we talk about leaving a job or leaving your family or leaving a community or leaving church or leaving the country, Because as far as I'm
Mm.
concerned, I'm in an abusive relationship with this entire country that's never going to become a better partner.
Right.
To then critique. So it's not only the financial implications, it's the judgment that comes from folks. Oh, why did you leave that security? Or, oh, why did you, and it's the same thing folks say to people trying to get out of abusive relationships. But at least you had a house, a roof over your head. But at least. And so I think one thing that I would like to see is, even as peers, is becoming more supportive of folks who are telling you their gripes about their workplace. I know we've talked before about, just like folks feel like they have to suffer because of their ancestry, unfortunately, women, those who identify as women have often said, like, and this is fresh in my mind because I just watched the Barbara Walters documentary not too long ago, right? But this idea of, like, I dealt with it. That's the way it is. Right? At least it's nowhere near how it was when I was coming up, right? These are the things that we say to each other. And so I want to hear and witness folks becoming more supportive of one. And I think I see some of that in what you were speaking to, Eliana, with folks sharing on social media about their experiences. And maybe if folks can put more faces to it, they can, gain a little bit more sympathy and empathy for it. Recognize the ways in which we probably have all experienced it. And if you haven't, how blessed you are. So yeah.
I'm so grateful that you would bring up that timeline, like in our lives, but also like ancestrally, because I think a lot of our families will say things to us that were protective and adaptive in prior experiences of racialized labor trauma that now, out of context, can actually increase our danger. So, like Dr. Resmaa Menakem talks about in My Grandmother's Hands, how trauma decontextualized in a person looks like personality, trauma decontextualized in a community looks like culture, and trauma decontextualized in a family, I don't remember what that looks like. But it's what I think that he's talking about is how, something that was adaptive previously, keep your head down, don't make a scene, because under chattel slavery or under colonization, if people said, ouch, this hurts, then families were ripped apart.
Right.
There were so many different, and so it makes sense that that is going to get passed down in a family's culture of this is how you make it out. I think sometimes our families give us feedback genuinely thinking, and I think clinicians do this too when it comes to workplace abuse, because we haven't been trained on things like institutional betrayal and stuff. Clinicians, family members can say things that they think will help us that actually put us in further danger of harm. And so clinicians, I would say, we would really do well to educate ourselves about the mechanisms that HR uses to reduce liability for a company rather than what they're telling us all that they're doing, which is to protect the employee.
Yeah.
I had a therapist who said to me, literally in the middle of my workplace abuse, well, go report it to HR. Luckily, I had already been trained as a supervisor. So I knew that I did need to report it to HR, but I need to put it in writing.
Yeah.
Don't ever make a report just verbally to HR, because you know that they will come at you. That is kind of hands down. And it's not that an individual HR professional is bad or evil or anything like that. It's their job. Their job literally is protect the liability of the company. So I knew enough already. No, I had to go to them. I had to document it, because you don't have any recourse. An attorney will not touch your case if you have not said that you have been abused and you've specifically identified the law that they violated, if they have violated a law. Because if you're not being abused based on a social identity, it's actually legal in this country. We cannot abuse children. We're not supposed to abuse adults or elders or anything like that, but we can abuse workers. That's a part of our toxic capitalism. But had I not understood that not only I needed to report it to HR, but I needed to put it in writing, but that I needed to build my toxic job go bag before I made that announcement, because they were going to come for me, and they did. So a toxic job go bag is one of the things that I really encourage employees to build immediately from day one. And I just want to, again, shout out, Black women have been saying these things for a long time now. So this is nothing new. I want to acknowledge it. Specifically, S. Anne Marie Archer, who is the anti-HR HR lady on LinkedIn and in the world, I've learned a lot from her. The idea for this toxic job go bag is that we want to already have at home, and don't send it through a workplace computer or phone or something like that IT can monitor. But you want to know, you want to have your employee handbook on hand. You want to have your job description. You want to have documentation, not just of violations of law and so on and so forth and bad treatment, but you also want to have documentation of all of the great work that you're doing. You want to know your stats of how your return on investment in a company, and anytime like employee annual reviews or anything place where people are documenting your success, you want to have all of that already at home before you go and make that complaint. Because in some, especially toxic workplaces, you make the complaint, you're automatically positioned as the problem, and they will shut off your computer access immediately. And then you don't have any of your documentation. So I think part of it is our mental health professions and higher education really need to be preparing our workforce to know how to support people who are experiencing workplace trauma in a way that won't put them in further danger.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad you said about that bag, because
Yes.
I don't think I've seen it happen. I've seen people be completely shut out of the system as soon as they say something or do something. And so having those things in place before you say a complaint, that's key. I haven't even thought about that. I'm so glad you said that. And I think something that I've been very mindful of and making sure I do is, for the people I'm working with, being very honest in that. There was one individual came to mind specifically who came in and her light was just so bright. Her energy was beautiful and positive, and she had so much motivation for the work. And she went through a few months and that light dimmed so much. And I said to her, and I said, you've lost your light. Like, your light has dimmed. And I do not want to just watch you, just wither away mentally, emotionally, and physically. She was having physical concerns too. And I think those sort of conversations allowed her to have a space of, okay, I love this work, but what is making my light dim? And it was the system she was in. It wasn't necessarily the work or the people, but the system, the institution. It was not allowing her to be who she was. And she had to leave. But I think having those as middle managers, we can have those conversations in very kind of protective ways. And I'm going to add this in about really making sure you have things in place before you say something, of reaching out to people and saying, like, I've seen your energy change. I want you to be aware of that, because maybe you're not allowing yourself to be. Maybe you're in denial about it. But yeah, that's another thing I'm adding to my toolbox. So thank you for that, Heliana.
I really appreciate that you brought up that point about denial. And can I just say that, like, anybody who gets to work with you as a manager is so incredibly lucky, because I know that you're navigating that almost impossible, if not actually impossible, balance. Like, it really takes a toll on us when we are having to be the shock absorber in both directions, where it can take a toll on us. But one of the things that the Workplace Bullying Institute shares is a statistic that 67.5% of people who answered one of their surveys about workplace abuse had a prior experience of interpersonal trauma. So it could have been child abuse, it could have been domestic violence, it could have been sexual trauma, or what have you.
Makes so much sense.
I think so. I think that there's something that can happen where workplace bullies and abusers actually they prune and preen the people who they're going to target, right? So they're I'm not thinking of the word right now, but they are intentionally kind of creating somebody who is going to be a good target for them in the workplace. And part of this can happen. There's a parallel that oftentimes happens with child abuse too. So people who abuse children do the same kind of a thing. They're prepping the child. They're going after the child who is most isolated, who is already at risk of not having anyone step in to support them and protect them. So workplace abusers oftentimes do that as well. The other side of it, though, is that the survival skills that we develop when we have early childhood abuse, it can even be neglect. It can be emotional neglect. Our parents are working too much and they're not available. So it doesn't even have to be big T trauma. It can be little T trauma. But what ends up happening if for children is that we have a choice, and it's not a conscious choice, but we've got a choice between, do I see this parent who I am or caregiver I'm dependent on for my basic needs, place to live, food, all these things, Do I see them as a problem, as a potential monster, or do I internalize it as this is my fault somehow? Most children will protect the attachment because it's survivalist at that point and turn it on themselves. And so I think that for those of us who have that early childhood trauma and then end up in a workplace abuse situation where, again, our access to basic needs, it's not just our income, it's health insurance, right? It's so many different parts of our basic ability to survive in an extremely expensive and capitalist society is connected to that work. And so there can be another splitting of awareness, what Dr. Jennifer Freyd out of University of Oregon talks about as so-called betrayal blindness. I am not a fan of that term because I think it's ableist. And what she is talking about there is the idea that we can both simultaneously know and not know something at the same time. And I think that can come up a lot. So that what you're talking about, that denial. So I would say that as a protective thing for those of us who are BIPOC, who are queer, who are living with neurodiversity or what have you, and we have any experiences of early childhood abuse or neglect, which most of us do. Let's just be honest. I mean, frankly, if you're raised in a homophobic society and you're queer, like, good luck not being traumatized at some point. If we have those prior experiences, to know that when we get into these workplaces, like my workplace abuser, for a long time, I was like, that person is just kind of rude. That person has really had a bad day. Oh gosh, it's like every day is that person's bad day. And I knew that they were terrorizing multiple people in the organization. But again, I minimized it in my own mind thinking they just got a personality problem. I was completely unaware of how dangerous they were, how they were actively organizing people against me and others. And so I think when we have those identities that are underrepresented in the workplace, and we have a history of trauma or neglect, and we are genuinely kind, good people who want to believe in and trust other human beings, there's a real risk that we might have some kind of level of denial about how dangerous the situation is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would certainly, I know that has been me. I don't think I know how dangerous anything is. And that probably has everything to do with everything to do with childhood trauma. I think, and I didn't, I mean, you don't think about it until you hear someone break it down like that. So I really appreciate that, Eliana, because it's like you build up what we call, and maybe this is why I don't really like the term resilience, because I feel like what they're really saying is, oh, you can take anything. And it's like, that's not, like, how much can you take is how I feel like people interpret resilience, which is a struggle for me as, in my healing, because it's like, anyway, that we could go down a whole other thing, but I certainly understand that. And I imagine that a lot of people that landed really well for them. Charlie said that he thinks very similar patterns can be seen in religious abuse, and I would absolutely agree. Exactly the same. It's just another institution.
100%. And that power dynamic and the belief, like our society functions based on a belief that we can trust people who have more power than us. And it's so profoundly dangerous when the people who are supposed to protect us don't protect us and actually turn on us when we expose abuse and betrayal and, unethical illegal behavior. And I feel like for those of us who work in mental health fields or in healthcare settings, it's especially dangerous when our workplace abuser is also a social worker or psychiatrist or whomever, because they have this identity as somebody who, I'm a helper, I don't harm people. And the gaslighting and the psychological manipulation can be even more dangerous. I think when it's a religious leader, that is like some of the most dangerous, because that person is saying that they have a special connection to a higher power. And I think that the religious trauma that befalls so many of us in the LGBTQIA2S community has to do with that, because they're not just saying that, like, oh, you're a failure at work, or you're a bad student, or you're a bad patient who's non-compliant. They're saying there is something inherently wrong with your soul.
Yes. And that hurts deeply, deeply. Gosh. And thank you, everybody that's been dropping things in the chat. Please do keep them coming. And just taking a quick break to shout out to Ace, who dropped in the chat. Hello. He just said, popping in real quick, plant a seed about our Revolutionary Social Work Summit, The Waves of Consciousness, happening this March on the big island of Hawaii. And hopefully, yes, Causha, your invitation is on its way. We would love to have everybody that's in this conversation right now. And we haven't finalized all the details, but it's basically, it's not so much like a conference and it's not so much like a retreat. It's somewhere in the middle of, we want to bring people together and gather and support each other and find some co-regulation and grounding there, but also move forward on some ideas and some projects and things like that. There will be yoga involved, there will be talking circles involved, but there will be work sessions as well, to write, to podcast, to, all of the things. So throwing that out there. Thank you, Ace. And he says thank you for filling in for him,
Of course.
Causha. So
I'm going to put my ticket on Klarna.
yeah.
I'm so glad we can put plane tickets on layaway now.
Yes. Gosh. No, it's going to be a good time.
Goodness.
Good time.
That's exciting.
But I did want to, as we're moving on with time, I do want to touch also on suicide prevention, because I know, Heliana, this is dear to your heart, but also within, I work for an organization still in Southeast Alaska, even though I'm in Hawaii now. And there's been a significant increase in completed suicides lately. And it's really hitting the communities, and it's hitting obviously families and friends, but also the clinicians and the people working to support other people. And I think we're doing a pretty okay job of supporting each other and going into different communities when those people need a break because they've been supporting the community. But I just wanted to give the floor to you, Heliana, on suicide prevention. What kind of work and thoughts you have on that right now?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to take a breath and acknowledge all of the loss that so many of us have experienced. If we're queer, we know somebody probably who's passed. If we are clinicians for any period of time, we know someone who's passed. Black women ages 18 to 65 have the highest rate of suicide of all women in the United States right now, but no one's talking about it because of, I would argue, because of misogynoir. I'm very concerned that our current crisis intervention system is carceral and is dangerous for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. I'm very concerned that clinicians are trained in a way to ultimately think about protecting their licenses rather than being present and showing up and helping clients to live through excruciating pain. I'm really concerned that the Trevor Lifeline has been disbanded. I'm very concerned that 988, the new crisis line that replaces the National Suicide Prevention Line, has a 40% increase in unrequested police response. I'm very concerned that when Black people who are in suicidal crisis end up in emergency rooms and psychiatric hospitals, that there are higher rates of chemical restraint, of abuse in these systems that are supposed to help people to get better. So I am very concerned that we are seeing increased numbers of people who have been injured by toxic systems, like Dr. Antoinette Candia Bailey, who died by bullycide following extreme workplace abuse at Lincoln University, a historically Black college and institution, university that was being bullied by her white supervisor, who was president of the university. What the news media have shared, she went to her doctor and said that the overwhelming anxiety and depression were very dangerous for her. That doctor said you should go on FMLA, signed off on the paperwork. She took it to her supervisor. That person refused to give her the FMLA. She then went to the supervising board, the governing board, and they said no, they don't get themselves involved in personnel matters. Shortly following that, she was fired by the abusive employer. And a couple days later, she died by bullycide. I'm very worried about Dr. Nikita Mortimer. She was a Haitian anesthesiologist who was organizing around workplace labor issues at a pronounced university hospital, and she died by bullycide as well. So I think that we are going to see more deaths of despair. This is going to continue happening. I'm concerned that we have responses in community when we've got Latinos and other immigrants who are scared to call crisis lines, who are scared to go to emergency rooms because they're scared that ICE is going to pick them up. of course, people's nervous systems are overwhelmed. And I think that's the big piece that, if I could leave two main points about this, one is when a person has a suicidal crisis, they are not broken, they are not defective. They cannot pray their way out of those thoughts. They cannot positive think their way out of those thoughts. What's happening is that the nervous system is crashing. It's having a freeze response. We talk about fight, flight, and freeze. It's just like the possum or the lizard who goes limp if they're being chased by an aggressor they can't escape or fight off. And that the idea is that that hawk will go past them to go find some other living prey. The same thing happens with the human nervous system. It crashes and that prefrontal cortex goes offline. And so what we need is, when we know that somebody's experiencing suicidal crisis, focus on what can we do right now to help you feel as safe as possible.
Yeah.
We want to interrupt the stress hormone flooding. We want to attend to their basic needs. Can I get you a blanket? Can I get you something to drink right now? Can I just sit here and listen to what is hurting so much? Calling 911, calling 988, going to an emergency room might actually result in trauma. It might actually result in death. We know that when somebody is going to an emergency room and they're sitting for a long period of time, there are bells going off, there are people coming in cardiac arrest, all of the things that happen in emergency rooms. That doesn't help the nervous system to calm down and that thinking part of the brain to come back online. So the best thing that we can do as clinicians is, first and foremost, regulate our own nervous systems, help ourselves to calm down. I think that the second piece is to provide reassurance and support that's culturally affirming. So the more that we can help ourselves stay in community, the more likely we are to have access to culturally affirming support. The further that we go into institutions, the more likely we are to experience systemic racism and systemic homophobia and transphobia and all that. So I've been working with some people, Kelechi Uboso, again, shout out to Kelechi. She and I recently published a new Keeping Each Other Safer in Community. It's Black suicide prevention, helping people to stay alive in community and outside of those systems that we know are dangerous. Of course, if a Black person says they have been in a hospital before and that's where they want to go, we should take them there. We should take them there. If they know all of the risks that are involved and they're still saying that's the best place to go, we should take them there. But ultimately, I think these days there are a lot of alternatives to an emergency room, 988 and 911. We have respite centers in the community that are oftentimes run by people with lived experience. A person can go in 24 hours or less, help their nervous systems to calm down, and then go home. And we can use things like safety plans that research has shown us actually helps people to stay alive. So I think that we're at a real moment where it's going to be important that we speak honestly about our systems that are actually causing danger to people.
Yes. That is a huge thing, Eliana. The liability that we as clinicians are told to feel, I don't know how. I mean, I know there's a true liability, but I think the way that it's talked about, it creates so much fear and it creates this problem that we now have where people are afraid to not do something like call 911 or say just go straight to the emergency room or send welfare checks and have police knocking on doors when someone's having a mental health crisis. And that is the last thing they really need. But we're in this fear state where we're told that that's what we have to do. And people are scared to not do that because they're afraid of, well, what if something happens and then I'm going to be held liable? And if we just take a step back, I think if we if we regulate our own nervous system, like you said, then we can see there's a lot more we can do before jumping to that step. And I love what just so simple of like, here's a blanket. Do you need some water? Should we put some music on? Should we just sit together? Should we cry together? You know, those things. One thing that did come up for me though is in Southeast Alaska, there's such little support other than going to the emergency room. You know, these respite centers and things like that, we don't have that in those rural communities. And people are at a loss of what do I do then? And we have in Juneau, they set up a mobile crisis unit, which I've actually found so helpful because these are people that are social workers and they're nurses. And you call them and you say, I'm really worried about this person, they're not picking up the phone, and they don't go knock down the door like the police often do. They try in different ways to contact them, and they were able to contact someone I was really worried about, and they ended up just having a text conversation, and the person was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I got caught up in this thing because of certain symptoms coming up, but she was okay. And I was able to be like, I'm just so glad she's okay. I didn't have to send the police over. But that's a lifeline in Juneau. In other areas in Southeast Alaska, there's such little options. But I think like you've mentioned, if we can regulate our own nervous system and just go to our basics, then maybe there we'll find more options and be more creative in that way. Or maybe that would just be enough to just sit with someone. And then they come down out of that high crisis state.
I love so much that you talk about that mobile crisis team, that I know that that's for many people extremely helpful to meet people where they're at. And whether, it's by text or meeting them in the community, that really can make all of the difference. I think also there's a lot of resource in our culture, and I think about like ballet folklorico or drumming circles, or, that our communities have always had this medicine inside of ourselves. And when we can help people and some people have been harmed by people in their own community and culture,
Absolutely.
so it would not feel safe. So I just want to acknowledge that. But for
Thank you.
clients who do really resonate with, maybe they had a grandmother, right? Maybe they had a grandmother who taught them about, fishing or beadwork or whatever ceremony or just daily practices that can be redirected to, that oftentimes connecting back. And because I think so much of suicidal crisis, especially with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, there's some element oftentimes of racial trauma in there. And so bringing in that cultural piece is not just about co-regulation, but it's about a specific matching of the medicine to the kind of injury that we've experienced. I think so that there's a book that I read for my dissertation called Life Beside Itself, that is about suicide prevention with Indigenous peoples in what's now referred to as Alaska. That was really powerful. And ultimately what she talks about, if I'm not mistaken, I think she might be a white researcher. So I appreciated her awareness of that. She's not even a part of the community, but she was like, she goes over the history of colonization and she says, what are we telling people to stay alive for? When the poverty, when the cruelty, when all of these things are constantly happening, right? And so there's some point at which we have to be changing the systems that are causing that repeated moral injury and crisis that's so excruciatingly painful that people need escape. And so I think that's part of it also, is knowing that when these suicidal crises come up, it is an experience of complete and total overwhelm from pain. How can we help we're not going to be able to ameliorate that pain, and acknowledging that. I think that's part of it too. So we're not gaslighting our clients either. Oh, just hang in there. It's going to get better. Like, is it? I don't know. How
Right.
can we? And this is where I think Black futurisms is so important, and like such medicine too, right? Is like, there is something about, and I get shivers thinking about it, but like that ability to imagine into a future that we're not yet in.
That's right.
There's some freedom that can come with that kind of, science fiction. My dad's a big sci-fi guy, and I get it now, So how can we bring in music and other intelligences in the body? I think you might have mentioned that before, Alicia. It's like sometimes eating a food that is associated with a memory of a time that we felt safe, that we felt seen and respected and understood, that in and of itself is a type of suicide prevention. Because the brain doesn't distinguish between a memory or what's happening right now, but we can tap into those older moments through our senses.
Yes. And that takes us to slow down, with people, and not to jump to the next step, because I'm just thinking of how healing that could be for someone, is being like, okay, like let's be with each other, and then bringing up some of these memories, because like you said, the brain can put itself back into the emotions that came up around those positive memories, and the sensations that you feel, even the smells, and putting someone in that space and holding that space for someone may just be what they need, and acknowledging yes, that does not solve everything else. It doesn't. And you're not going to wake up tomorrow and be healed. Healing is a journey, not a destination, right? And it's the same thing. We're not going to get to some destination and be fixed. But right now we could be together and we could bring up these memories and we could laugh together, even this really hard moment, or we could cry together. This is healing for me, I think, to hear too.
Absolutely. And, I think I also, and this is something that, I talk about publicly, but that talk actually about with only like a couple of people is I feel like we need spaces to also just talk about what we're feeling when we are in those moments of suicidal ideation, of not wanting to be here, of trying to find reason to be here, trying to find purpose. It's additional stress to have to like make someone feel better about them now stressing that you've told them this is what you're feeling, this is what you're going through. And so having to comfort someone just is like, then that's more on top of what you're already feeling. And so being able to provide, and I recognize that not everyone is able to, but if you are, being able to provide that space for someone to be able to say like, I mean, if you need to, no, I don't have anything planned, whatever. This is just how I'm feeling right now. Like I woke up this morning and was like, what, why am I, or maybe you are, and this is something that you just need to talk through. And I think this is something else I've been talking about a lot lately. All that is going on in the world, one thing, or in this country in particular, one thing that I am hoping the chaos inspires is boldness on all sides. I'm really, really tired of boldness only coming from oppressors. I'm tired of boldness only coming from those who are trying to keep their foot on our necks. I need the same boldness from those who claim to want freedom, because that is wanting true freedom. Is you got to be bold about it, and you got to be just as bold as the people saying you don't deserve it. And at some point, it just has that just has to be it. Like we can have all the niceties, we can have all of the things, but at some point, and this isn't to discourage folks, because I know we're all at different places on our journey. But at some point, I just really feel like the greatest prevention is going to be boldness as much on the side of those who claim they want to see change as it is on the side of those who claim they don't. And I think that for me, and maybe that's what the living loudly is. I'm not really sure, but I just like, even as I think about our profession, right? Like I've been telling people this might be a great great time for Causha to have licensure now, because apparently we can do whatever we want to do. Right. And what was keeping me from that was oversight, because I like to do things the way that I know are best for clients, best for consumers, best for people, not best for the system, which previously licensure oversight would have been a problem on. But now it actually, I see this as an opportunity to be like, well, they doing it. They saying who they don't want to serve. Daring them to do something. Right. Almost. So I'm kind of inspired when I keep saying, like, I feel like I've been preparing for such a moment as this. Like, there's always like, it's not really silver lining, but I think just there's opportunity in chaos.
Yeah.
There's always opportunity in chaos. And what you do with those opportunities determines which direction we go, forward or backward. So,
yes. Oh, that was bold, Causha. And I think boldness doesn't always need to be, I think sometimes people hear bold and like speak up as like violence and this huge outrage, but you can be bold in love and in peace too, right? But you can still be bold about it. And another thing you spoke on is being prepared for this moment. And that's why me and Ace talk so much about that inner work, because these moments are here right now. And they're going to be here in the future. And we have to constantly do our own inner work and take care of ourselves, not in just this like superficial self-care way that the social work field talks about, but like actually taking care of ourselves and working on our own wounds, being aware of our own wounds, being in community with each other, all of those things. Like, we have to do that inner work, because that outer work, it's here now, but it's also going to be here in the future. And I think, Causha, it might have been you before, you talked about tapping in, tapping out. Was that us having conversation? Yeah. And there's times where we can tap out and other people are going to tap in. And that's okay, because then you can take time to do that inner work and then you can tap back in. But yeah, you got to be bold about it. And we got to
Absolutely.
support each other through it.
And even in that, that's the rest, right? Be bold in your rest. Social work tells us
Yes.
not to rest, right? Oh, it's normal. I mean, you do free practicum hours. I don't, I mean, you do, they tell you to work for low salary. They tell you, so even in that, you are being bold in advocating for your taking care of yourself, taking your off days, your personal days, so that you can show up as your best self is important.
Exactly.
So yeah, absolutely.
Listening to you, Causha, reminded me of one of these. Was it on Instagram that you did a thing? It was like it was a live event, and I just remembered listening in on social media. Well, anyway, where I'm trying to go with this is that for folks who are not following you, I highly recommend people to follow you, Causha, because
Yes.
I'm serious. I'm serious. And Chantel too. Like there is a way in which every time that I hear you speak, I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what needs to be said and is not being said in other places. And the idea of having the audacity to suggest that we as social workers are human beings who have limits. This is a system. I think it gets back to the fundamental danger of social work as a profession and the way that our profession originated. We are to maintain these unequal systems. And when people get hurt, because we know we're going to get hurt by toxic capitalism or whatever, then they come to us. And then we're supposed to help them to tolerate the symptoms, but not actually fix the problem. And I feel like we're coming to a critical point with the social work profession where we're going to have to figure our stuff out. Because otherwise the fallacy of our code of ethics will just be they'll be laid bare. And I think that's what we're seeing happening as the fall of empire happens. It's going to fall in multiple places. So I also would be thrilled for you to become a licensed clinician and to be out there, because we need more licensed clinicians who are really about liberation, not about how to live with certain symptoms and how to gaslight ourselves. Because that's frankly what it's about. A lot of times is like, we call it depression, we call it anxiety, but really these are very reasonable responses when women, when Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, neurodiverse people, and so on are systemically oppressed. Of course we hurt. Anyone hurts when you get hit, right? So we need more people who are putting that message out there and not using the DSM as a way to force people to gaslight themselves, see themselves as defective in some way.
Yes. The DSM, I have such
that's another
hard
pod. We
time
got to
with
come
that
back for
thing.
that one.
Oh my goodness. I would that's a constant journey for me, because sometimes as a clinical supervisor and knowing the exam and knowing the licensing stuff that we have to go through and helping people understand what's in the DSM, but at the same time talking about the DSM for what it is, and that we are just having this human experience, and there's things in this book that then you put in your documentation for insurance purposes because these people need to be served. But remember what you're actually doing in the space with this person. They're not this DSM diagnosis at all. It's such a hard place to be. But my goodness, I could talk to you both for hours and hours and hours. And like you say, Causha, another podcast will go deeper on the DSM. But thank you so much. And I just want to give you both the time. Any last words for you, Heliana? Anything that we didn't cover that maybe you just wanted to share before we do wrap up?
Thank you. I just want to send big love to trans community and gender diverse community right now. I feel like this is another place where the NASW is really failing our society. And just on that level of the DSM and how the DSM it's a gatekeeper. It's a gatekeeper for trans health. Well, clinicians right now, we are called to stand up with righteousness right now. Clinicians are being targeted who are providing trans health care. And we have got to refuse to participate in a system that we know is killing trans people. Just
Mhm.
point blank.
Yeah. Thank you. And Charlie said, thank you all for showing up in the world the way you do and for sharing the conversation today. Big love. And to you, Charlie, for how you show up and just you being you. Thank you. And Causha, any last words from you?
I just heart and second and uplift what Eliana said. You know, I want clinicians and all folks, particularly who call themselves social workers, to stand up and to and I recognize that everyone as an individual human has their own set of beliefs, their own upbringings, their own traumas, their own experiences that they're all bringing to their profession. And at the end of the day, I would like to make the assumption, I would like to be able to make the assumption that if you came into the profession, it was because at the end of the day, you wanted to help people. So anything that is doing the opposite of that, I encourage you to look within and ask yourself about. Yeah, and just I'm sending big love to all humans who are navigating this world right now. You know, I always encourage folks to be gracious with themselves. Be as gracious with yourself as you are with others. Yeah. And thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Ace, for thinking of me and for having me on. Always love talking to you, Eliana.
Yeah, of course. And know everyone that's listening, we're here for each other. If this conversation shows anything, we're building bigger and bigger in community and connecting everybody. And so if you need support, reach out to one of us. And I do want to just pop up a few things. Eliana, I'm gonna put up, where did it go? The workplace trauma recovery.com. What should people go here for to this website?
Thank you. So I just want to thank both of you so much, and for the audience who have participated, and apologize, Chanel. I think I pronounced your name with a T before, so I apologize for mispronouncing your name. But people can go to the workplacetraumarecovery.com if they are looking for professional coaching around workplace trauma. And the things that I'm most passionate about are racial workplace trauma and LGBTQ related workplace trauma. And I will work with people who have other kinds of workplace trauma. But in particular, what I do is I provide people with resources for their self-defense and to help them to begin the post-traumatic growth recovery on the physical health, the mental health, as well as the financial health and professional trajectory.
Amazing. Thank you. And we'll make sure that this is in the description as well, post-production. But I'm also going to put up this one if you just wanted to shout out this too.
I'm so excited about this. So on Mondays, 5 p.m. Pacific, starting a week from this coming Monday, so it's September 8th, I'm going to be working with an amazing immigration attorney, Gabriel Espinosa Ramos. We're going to be doing a free LinkedIn Live for an hour or however long we go. The whole idea is to be focusing on Latinx workplace wellness and self-defense rights and so on. And I really especially want to extend an invitation to Afro-Latinos, to Latinx people who are indigenous from so-called Latin America, are queer, and all of our diverse in the Latinx community. We need each other right now. We need each other desperately, and we are hardworking people who contribute so much to the United States. We have so much to be proud about and to help each other right now, because many of us are feeling like we can't go to hospitals or call for help. And so we especially need each other.
Yeah. Thank you for putting that on. So if you need any more of that information, reach out to one of us, LinkedIn, email us. Causha, is the best place for people to connect with you, contact you?
Yeah, check me out on LinkedIn under my name, Causha Spellman-Timmons. We got a lot of stuff coming up. Our Housing Justice Initiative. So website www.castassociates, that's CASTASSOCI 8, which is in the middle of a 5-month pilot program for housing justice initiative stuff happening here in Philly. And then I also have still the coaching and consulting going on, so folks want to check that out. the Liberation Sessions podcast. We'll also be dropping all of the episodes here in a little while. But yeah, if you just follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram, cast_associates, you can stay tuned on there for all of the stuff. And like Heliana said, I just post a lot of stuff as well. So whether you're looking for news, encouragement, a job, it's all there.
Everything. I love that about Causha. The diversity of the insight and knowledge and resourcing that you have is incredible. So
I do my best.
Thank you both. I appreciate everything that you've brought today and just being in your company. So thank you. Hopefully we can do this again. Hopefully we'll physically be in space together at some point, maybe in Hawaii. We'll see. We'll let you know more about that. But have a wonderful rest of your weekend and take care, everybody. Thank you. Peace.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Take care.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, and we just want to say thank you for your continued support. You can catch us on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Remember to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share our content with the world. But most of all, never forget to keep being revolutionary. Peace.